It's certainly not the news any of us wanted, but it does, many analysts feel, reflect the cold, hard reality. The Prime Minister warned tonight of a dangerous decade ahead as he revamped our defence strategy in conjunction with America and Australia.
We represent three allies who have shed blood together in defence of our shared values that are coming together again to fulfil that higher purpose of maintaining freedom, peace and security.
An increasingly aggressive China, the ongoing war with Russia in Ukraine threatened, the PM said, a world defined by danger, disorder and division. Robert is with him in San Diego. Also on News at 10 tonight. The BBC Director General insists he didn't back down in the Lineker row, but pretty much everyone else thinks, yup, that's exactly what he did. One bank saved, but the contagion spreads in America. The massive icebergs that have broken away from Antarctica and are drifting towards international shipping lanes, one the size of Greater London, the other even bigger. The village in India where digital detox time is now the law.
Critics might regard this as an invasion of privacy, but this initiative has widespread support throughout this village.
And it was certainly a more diverse Oscars night, so has reform led to changes that will last?
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Rishi Sunak is tonight taking part in a mini-summit on the west coast of America, which is likely to have far-reaching implications for the future security of the whole world. His meeting with President Biden and the Australian Premier Anthony Albanese, the so-called AUKUS security alliance, is no doubt being closely monitored by Beijing. The three leaders are rubber-stamping the announcement of nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines for Australia. They say the deal is about keeping our oceans free and contributing to global security and stability. But underlying that is the context of China's growing ambitions and influence in the Indo-Pacific region.
The military pomp of an important security deal between America, Britain and Australia, designed in large part to push back against the growing challenge from China, with much focus on powerful new nuclear submarines to be built in Britain for delivery to Australia.
AUKUS has one overriding objective: to enhance the stability of the Indo-Pacific amid rapidly shifting global dynamics. Simply stated, we're putting ourselves in the strongest possible position to navigate the challenges of today and tomorrow, together.
We represent three peoples who have shed blood together in defence of our shared values, and three democracies that are coming together again to fulfil that higher purpose of maintaining freedom, peace and security.
But there are risks, as I discussed with the Prime Minister.
There are concerns that indirectly this will add to nuclear proliferation. How do you reassure people about that?
We've obviously taken all our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty seriously. We've been in touch with the IAEA and all of that has been taken care of.
This is partly about containing the threat of China. What would you say to British businesses and their business relationships with China? Should they reduce those?
One thing is clear over the past few years that we are more concerned about China's behaviour. They're acting in a more authoritarian fashion at home, more assertive overseas. They represent a systemic challenge. Now, we're not alone in thinking about China in that way.
Some governments have instructed their public officials not to use TikTok. What would you say to British civil servants, British ministers about their use of TikTok?
So we don't routinely comment on these things, but we do take very seriously the use of government IT, and we of course also look at what our allies are doing in that space.
So you're saying if anybody is using government IT, don't go on TikTok?
There are established guidelines in place. We want to make sure that we protect the integrity and security of sensitive information, and we will always do that and take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that that happens.
You are increasing spending on defence to 2.25% of GDP by 2025, and you've set a long-term aim of getting to 2.5%. But why not the 3% that your immediate predecessor, Liz Truss, wanted?
Well, I think we want to invest what's necessary to keep us safe. It's clear that the world has become more volatile. The threats to our security have increased. And in light of that, it's right that we invest more.
The important relationship between Britain and America was strained when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. Joined by the Australian Prime Minister, it certainly looks improved. Three allies, more united militarily than ever to contain China. Whether China will view this as provocative to the point of hostile is the big question. Robert Peston, News at 10 in San Diego.
Beijing has already made its views on the AUKUS submarine deal crystal clear. They claim it violates the spirit of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, even though the submarines are conventionally armed. The deal is all about bolstering Western power and influence in the Indo-Pacific as a counterweight to what the three countries perceive as China's growing presence. The deal is backed by other allies like Japan, South Korea, and most controversially, Taiwan, which of course China regards as its own. In military terms, US resources do still considerably outstrip China. America spends around £670 billion a year compared to China's $185 billion. China, however, does lead the way in troop numbers, with personnel numbering 2 million. But again, in terms of navies, the US outnumbers China for aircraft carriers by 11-2. Now, today's deal adds to an already delicate and somewhat scary, one might say, balance of power in the region.
China's ambitions are not confined to just this planet. On Monday, it launched another satellite into space as part of a rapidly expanding exploration program. The plan is for Chinese astronauts to land on the moon by the end of this decade. That is the same time frame within which Xi Jinping could make his move on Taiwan. The Chinese president used his closing speech at the Communist Party's annual gathering to restate his aim of reunification and declare his army will be built into a wall of steel.
We should strengthen national defence and modernise the army, building the People's Army into a great wall of steel that effectively safeguards national security, sovereignty and development interests.
In terms of numbers, China has quickly overtaken the United States to have the largest armed forces and navy fleet in the world. America is still more technologically advanced and has a defence budget 3 times that of Beijing's, but the People's Liberation Army is catching up. With one conflict in mind, the country has produced its own fleet of fighter jets and aircraft carriers to support them.
Every Chinese leader since Mao Zedong has set reunification with Taiwan as a Communist Party target. But Xi Jinping has established the power and the military to make it happen. It has brought China to a critical point in its relations with the West, where a defence deal designed as a deterrent will be read as a threat.
The Chinese government said AUKUS poses a serious nuclear proliferation risk and has accused Australia of undermining regional peace and propping up US hegemony. But China's new premier appeared to take a more conciliatory tone today, talking of cooperation, not confrontation with the United States.
China and the US can and must cooperate. There is a lot that the two countries can achieve together. Encirclement and suppression is in no one's interests.
That final warning about encirclement and suppression was a phrase first introduced by the president last week. The AUKUS deal will be taken as further evidence of a US-led attempt to contain China and its plans for Taiwan. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Beijing.
And Robert joins us now from San Diego. I mean, Robert, we have there the two different perspectives on this. Perhaps, from our side, viewing this deal as a deterrent, but as Debbie was saying, the Chinese possibly viewing it as a threat. Either way, it's a pretty big moment, is it not?
It certainly is. You can probably see behind me a Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarine of the sort that are being sold to Australia before we get round to developing this new generation, allegedly the most powerful submarines that Britain has ever produced, which will also go to Australia. This has plainly rattled the Chinese. One of the things that really struck me just now, listening to Joe Biden here at this naval base in San Diego, is the sheer number of times he said this was not about allowing Australia to become part of that very small club of nations that have nuclear weapons. Yes, it's about nuclear technology to drive the submarines. He insisted that the International Atomic Agency, which polices the non-proliferation deals, is clear that nothing that is being suggested by America or Australia will turn Australia into a nuclear weapons country. But, as we've just heard from Debbie, China doesn't really believe this, and the reason they are sceptical is because Rishi Sunak was absolutely explicit. This is, to an extent, about curbing China. So, as I said in my piece, the big issue about this is how much the Chinese see this as an escalation of aggression. Just now, the American president has insisted this is not aggressive. One final thing, on a matter closer to home, the American president has also just announced that he hopes to come over to celebrate the 25 years of the Good Friday Agreement in April. That would be a trip to Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, something the British government has been very keen to see.
It would be a big moment. Robert, thank you very much indeed. To news here now, and quite frankly, it's difficult to escape the conclusion tonight that the end of the saga of Gary Lineker's tweet has left the BBC in more of a mess than ever before. MPs are, as we speak, debating the government's new asylum policy, about which the sports presenter, as you all know by now, made his notorious tweet. But the fact is that Lineker's reinstatement today, plus both an apology and a pledge to review the corporation's impartiality code, represents a humiliating climb down for BBC management. Tonight, moreover, it was claimed by a former Director General, no less, this very deal was turned down by the BBC on Friday.
Gary Lineker learned this morning that he would be back presenting Match of the Day after a deal with the BBC, but he didn't have much to say to reporters.
I've already said what I'm going to say on Twitter. If I say anything more now, it just encourages people to doorstep me. Well, we're finished.
He tweeted confirming the deal and thanked his supporters and colleagues for their backing.
Sorry we're unable to show our normal Match of the Day too.
The BBC was forced to broadcast limited football coverage this weekend. Lineker was asked to step back after tweeting that the language used in the government's asylum plan was not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. The BBC says Lineker has now agreed to follow editorial guidelines while a review on social media policy takes place. But the Director General's handling of the case has come under fire.
Asking Gary Lineker to step aside, I think, was appropriate at that moment. Then we reset and we do the things we've laid out in this agreement, which I think are right, and we go forward. Absolutely not affected by pressure from one party or the other. That is not how we work editorially in the BBC.
I think the BBC really went awry when it suspended Gary, because if it had simply said, let's keep you on air on Match of the Day for another few weeks while we resolve this, that would have been a better approach rather than causing this confrontation, which made everybody in BBC Sport walk out.
The BBC will be hoping it's done enough to end this immediate crisis, but the damage left behind is clear to see. Its impartiality and independence are its bedrock, and when they're perceived to have been weakened, the corporation's reputation suffers.
I gave no financial advice to the Prime Minister.
The row has put further pressure on the BBC's chairman, Richard Sharp, already facing questions and an investigation for his help facilitating an £800,000 loan guarantee for then Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
I think Richard Sharp's position is increasingly untenable. Obviously, there's a process going on. But I think most people watching the complete mess of the last few days would say, how on earth is he still in position and Gary Lineker's been taken off air?
As Gary Lineker heads back to Match of the Day, for the BBC's leadership, the challenge of restoring the public's trust after a turbulent week is just beginning. Neil Connery, News at 10.
Well, continuing somewhat on that theme, after a heated debate in the Commons, the government's controversial illegal migration bill will shortly be voted on any second now by MPs tonight. Earlier, outside, hundreds of people gathered in Parliament Square to protest against the bill, and Romilly is there now. Romilly, passionate views on both sides of this debate tonight.
Yes, Tom, it's been an incredibly feisty debate with not just Labour, the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, but many Tory MPs voicing their unhappiness with the bill. You can hear the bells going off behind me calling MPs back in to vote on this. During the debate, the Speaker had to intervene a number of times, asking for MPs to temper their language. Even so, the bill was variously described as monstrous, abhorrent, or on the other side, the only answer to the British people being taken for a ride. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, mounted not just a passionate defence of the bill, but of her own personal position, saying this.
It's perfectly respectable for a child of immigrants like me to say that I'm deeply grateful to live here, to say that immigration has been overwhelmingly good for the United Kingdom, but that we've had too much of it in recent years. And to say that uncontrolled and illegal migration is simply bad.
Labour have questioned whether the bill will be effective, calling it a con, but it's the views of Theresa May that will worry the government more. Herself a former Home Secretary as well as a former Prime Minister, and she questioned whether the bill will work, pointing out problem after problem with it, saying that most of those who are here illegally don't come on small boats but overstay their visas, that those fleeing persecution can't find legal routes, and concluding this.
Whenever you close a route, the migrants and the people smugglers find another way. And anybody who thinks that this bill will deal with the issue of illegal migration once and for all is wrong.
The bill is expected to pass this stage tonight, but many Tory MPs making clear that their support is contingent on it being amended at a later stage.
OK, Romilly, thank you very much indeed. Now, the biggest bank failure since the global financial crisis of 2008 caused President Biden to step in today and declare that the American banking system is safe. He was seeking to project calm after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and the subsequent failure of a second, smaller bank. Fears of a financial upheaval in the tech sector and indeed beyond prompted US regulators to take emergency measures to stave off any more failures. Here, HSBC bought Silicon Valley's UK arm in a rescue deal agreed after all-night talks between the government and the Bank of England.
There was green everywhere as the New York Stock Exchange started trade today, an Irish-themed opening bell ahead of St Patrick's Day, and green arrows for stocks. A relief rally taking hold after the US government acted decisively to stop further fallout from the second biggest bank collapse in US history.
This hour, the very latest on the fallout from SVB.
Right now, Wall Street and Main Street are wondering if more dominoes will fall. Or if the
Silicon Valley Bank had got caught out by sharply rising interest rates, leading to a substantial loss on bond investments, which in turn spooked investors. The bank run spread to another firm's signature bank before the government stepped in with this emphatic message from the top.
Today, thanks to the quick action of my administration over the past few days, Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. Small businesses across the country, the deposit accounts at these banks can breathe easier knowing they'll be able to pay their workers and pay their bills.
Silicon Valley's tech giants are largely unaffected by this banking crisis. Instead, it was smaller startups who were left scrambling to get their money out before the government stepped in.
We were very scared and very focused. And as soon as we validated the fact that there was a risk of a bank run, we removed funds immediately. And we were very, very lucky to make several transfers before SVB froze accounts. I think many of us small business owners who had anything in SVB we'll experience some form of fiscal PTSD for the rest of our lives.
The shock of this bank run will bring back memories of the great crash of 2008. But this time the government has acted immediately to stem the losses using money from this institution. Officials here say that means, unlike 15 years ago, this time no public funds will be used to end this banking crisis. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Washington.
Scientists are tracking a potentially massive consequence of climate change. 2 huge icebergs that have broken off from Antarctica and are now drifting dangerously close to international shipping lanes in the South Atlantic. And when I say huge, I mean colossal. One's the size of Greater London, the other even bigger. And Martin is here to tell us all about it. Martin.
Yeah, well, Tom, 2 icebergs and 2 things to keep an eye on, actually. The first is wildlife, the second is shipping. Now, these are the very first images of one of the icebergs, A81, currently in the Weddell Sea, just off Antarctica. It's similar in size to Greater London. Now, it carved off the Brunt ice shelf in January and has already travelled about 150 kilometres down towards the south. The second one the British scientists are keeping an eye on is twice the size. A76A is as big as Cornwall. It's been on the move for nearly 2 years and is now heading north. It's currently between the Falklands and South Georgia Island. Now, there's nothing to worry about, nothing new about icebergs breaking off and melting, but we know ocean temperatures and levels are rising. That's impacting storms like Cyclone Freddy and could have a similar impact on icebergs.
Scientists are predicting that actually these types of icebergs might carve off more frequently in a warmer world in the future. But at the moment, this is a natural process that we're monitoring. So actually, this once-in-a-decade event is really quite a novel thing for us to study.
Now, one of the biggest worries is shipping. Here's the amount of vessels which pass to the south of Cape Hope. If A76A becomes grounded on the area of rocks just to the west of Georgia Island, it could break into pieces, causing not only a sinking risk, but forcing captains to take huge detours. The second worry is what happens when they melt. A76A weighs, listen to this, 1 trillion tonnes. It contains nutrients which are good for the ocean, but it also holds as much fresh water as 3,000 Lake Windermere's. And if melting happens unusually quickly, that could change the concentration of salt in the ocean and impact the wildlife. Now, there is, though, some good news, Tom, because scientists nowadays have much more data. They've also got better tools at their fingertips, satellites particularly. So hopefully in the future, we'll have better tools to model what's going to happen.
Well, Martin, I'm ending my day with you. I began it too. We did a very good podcast. You were fascinating on green measures in the budget. That's the Need to Know podcast, so do download it. Now, tens of thousands of junior doctors came out on strike across England today. Their 72-hour walkout over pay and conditions began this morning, causing major disruption, with hundreds of operations and appointments likely to be cancelled. The doctors' union, the BMA, says junior doctors' pay has fallen in real terms by 26% over the last 15 years. They make up 40% of the NHS workforce. Emergency and critical care will not be affected. OK, let's move on to a complete change of pace. An example from a small village in India we might all sometimes feel like following. The idea of detoxing has been fashionable for years now, of course, with all kinds of diets and juices alleged to clean out the system and improve health and goodness knows what else. But the people of one corner of Western India have come up with a much simpler idea. Every evening, as John found out, they undergo a digital detox.
This is a seemingly unremarkable and quiet corner of Western India where the old ways of doing things still have their place. At the heart of the area is the village of Mahite Vadgaon. In the early evening, almost everyone can be found at home watching screens of various kinds. We all know the drill. But the thing that makes this village a place apart is what happens every evening at 7 o'clock. A siren heralds the start of what they call a digital detox. By law, all screens have to be turned off. In this household, Mum admitted that she used to be addicted to watching TV soaps at this time.
Do you miss them?
She said that actually she now watches them during the day instead, But she also said she has come to appreciate family time during the digital detox, which lasts from 7 until 8:30 p.m. These people are heading out on patrol to enforce the law. Critics might regard this as an invasion of privacy, a case of Big Brother watching you to make sure you're not watching anything. But this initiative has widespread support throughout this village. The most noticeable benefits have been appreciated by the village's school teachers. Less screen time means fewer distractions for the pupils and more schoolwork being done. It was a brilliant idea, and I've noticed massive changes in the kids' education. We sought the children's opinion. 16-year-old Gayatri told me that family life has improved, and so has the quality of dinner. We are talking to each other more, and my mum is able to concentrate on making better food. In a world that seems obsessed about being switched on, these people believe they are preserving the virtues available by switching off, just for a while. John Irvine, News at 10, Western India.
Well, it's a brilliant idea, but good luck to all those of us who are prepared to contemplate raising the idea at home. Finally, this year's Oscars ceremony was, perhaps more than ever before, a celebration that the dream of diversity can become a reality. Instead of the usual bankable box office names, history was made by an independent film about a Chinese-American family which dominated the awards, and by its star, who became the first Asian-born woman to win Best Lead Actress.
Michelle Yeoh. It was to be a night of cultural firsts. No other Asian woman had ever won a Best Actress Oscar before.
For all the little boys and girls who look like me watching tonight, this is a beacon of hope. I have to dedicate this to my mom. She's 84, and I'm taking this home to her. She's watching right now in Malaysia, KL, with my family and friends. I love you guys. I'm bringing this home to you.
And joy too from her screen husband from Everything Everywhere All at Once. Ke Huy Quan fled Vietnam as a child and now he'd won an Oscar.
My journey started on a boat. I spent a year in a refugee camp. They say stories like this only happen in the movies. I cannot believe it's happening to me.
He was still jumping for joy hours afterwards. And another first for representation, a Best Original Song win for India.
Today I am representing my India, my country. Today I am holding my country with my hand.
It was really good. It was very emotional. Made me proud to be a filmmaker.
In another win for underrepresented groups, James Martin, the actor and disability rights campaigner, became an Oscar winner on his birthday with the team behind An Irish Goodbye.
Just amazing how not just winning an Oscar, but especially on my birthday. Fantastic.
Happy birthday! Not many Oscar winners get this.
Happy birthday to you.
Ruth Carter. Celebrations too for costume designer Ruth Carter, the first black woman to win 2 Oscars.
Thank you to the Academy for recognizing the superhero that is a black woman.
The American Academy will be breathing a sigh of relief today on the subject of diversity and representation, something that has plagued the Oscars for many years. The 7 Oscar wins for Everything Everywhere All at Once would suggest that changes to the voting membership at the Academy are having an impact. But of course, the real proof will be, what do the Oscars look like next year? Nina Nanar, News at 10 in Los Angeles.
And Nina has been speaking to Oscar winner Charles Mackesy for her podcast series Unscripted. So do take a listen wherever you get your podcasts from. We did a feature on him on News at 10 not long ago. Sounds like a fascinating guy. So do take a listen. That's it from me. See you tomorrow. Good night. Thanks for watching.